The high in the north, but it stays mild in the far south until Thursday morning when it turns cold everywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Oh, I'm a little bit discombobulated following Michelle. It sort of feels like I shouldn't be here for another 60 minutes yet. But fabulous show, Michelle. You know the drill, as she always says. Evidently, I don't know the drill. But this is GB News on your television and on your radio. Feel free to mix and match on tonight's Mark Steyn show. Is the Duke of Cambridge really the best chap to be speaking out on the future of the monarchy? Is Joe Biden's son Hunter, the Duke of Crackbridge, really the best chap to be running Ukrainian biolabs? And is Chairman Xi the best chap to make head of the Commonwealth? But every dystopian nightmare has a silver lining, and that's you, the non-deranged part of the show. Let me know what's on your mind by email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can Twitter me at gbnews. Stump the Steins coming up. You can ask me anything about anything you like. Feel free to throw in a few ad hominem attacks if you wish. If my hairpiece is askew, have at it. If I've got bits of an old Savaloy stuck in my beard, mock them mercilessly. You don't have to tie it to the big geopolitical questions. Low abuse suffices unto itself. All that coming up after the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thank you. The top stories tonight. Chelsea FC owner Roman Abramovich and at least 2 Ukrainian peacekeepers are reported to have suffered from what's being called a suspected poisoning event. The Wall Street Journal says the incident happened following a meeting in Kiev early this month. The US newspaper says the Russian oligarch apparently suffered symptoms including sore eyes and peeling skin. The Foreign Secretary says Vladimir Putin's forces are abducting Ukrainian politicians, activists and journalists as Russia fails to meet its military targets. Liz Truss called it an abhorrent tactic. Mariupol city's mayor estimates around 160,000 people are still trapped in his city without heating or electricity. Liz Truss re-emphasised the need to stop President Putin.
We know that Putin is not serious about talks. He is still wantonly bombing innocent citizens across Ukraine. And that is why we need to do more to ensure that he loses and we force him to think again. We need to ensure that any future talks don't end up selling Ukraine out or repeating the mistakes of the past.
Liz Truss. Well, the Chancellor has been accused of doing very little for those who are out of work and relying on benefits. But giving evidence to the Treasury Select Committee, Rishi Sunak defended his spring statement, saying it would have been irresponsible for the government to have borrowed more to raise benefits in the face of rising inflation. Pupils in England who are at risk of failing core subjects are to be offered targeted support, such as tutoring sessions. The school's white paper also requires all schools to teach for at least 32.5 hours a week by September 2023. The Education Secretary today said teachers' starting salaries would increase to £30,000 a year, and he announced his department is making a £180 million investment in the early years workforce. He also made a pledge to parents.
All parents want their children to be happy and to grow up to a future that is full of promise. So I'm today making a pledge to parents. It is a pledge from me and from this government via schools to all families. The parent pledge is that any child that falls behind in English or maths will receive timely support to enable them to reach their potential.
Nadeem Zahawi speaking this afternoon. Well, there was drama at the Oscars in Hollywood last night with the actor Will Smith hitting the host Chris Rock during the awards ceremony. Here's what it looked like.
Oh, wow!
A right hook happened when the host made a joke about the actor's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. It happened just minutes before Will Smith picked up Best Actor for his role in the film King Richard. The Conservative MP Dehenna Davison told GB News today she's written an open letter to the actor.
I think it's understandable wanting to defend your loved ones. And actually, in a way, that's very much why I set up this all-party group, because the reason I'm so passionate about this issue is because my own father was killed by a single punch. But there are ways to stand up for what you believe in, to stand up for your loved ones without resorting to violence and without resorting to the sort of act we saw from Will Smith. And that's what I really want to raise awareness of there, that violence is not the answer.
Dehenna Davison there. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Now more from Mark Steyn.
Years ago, 1942, Winston Churchill told the guests at the Lord Mayor's luncheon at the Mansion House, quote, "I have not become the King's First Minister in order to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire." Boris Johnson regards himself as the Winston de nos jours, so he is surely familiar with that quote. But in cold reality, has he become the Queen's First Minister in order to preside over the liquidation of the British Commonwealth? Mr. Johnson regards himself as a warrior for so-called global Britain. But Britain has never looked less global. Across the map, China is picking off Commonwealth islands one by one, from its billion-dollar highway expenditures in Jamaica to its proposed new military base in the Solomons. In this Platinum Jubilee year, the Queen risks losing her dominions in the Caribbean and the Pacific to Chairman Xi, who has, frankly, a far bigger checkbook. Australia certainly looks on the Solomon Islands as within its sphere of influence, and over the weekend, at least one commentator down under compared the new Chinese base to the Cuban Missile Crisis and called on the Australian Armed Forces to invade the Solomons. That would be a rather odd war, a bit like the first Indo-Pakistani War of 1947, when the two newly independent nations still had their armies under British command, so English officers of the Indian Army were going to war against English officers of the Pakistani Army, with both groups reporting to the same ultimate commander-in-chief, King George VI. If that Australian observer gets his way, Australian soldiers of the Queen will be taking down Solomon Island soldiers of the Queen. Happy Jubilee. But set aside that potential excitement, because the Duke of Cambridge's words in the not-so-British West Indies may be more typical of a general fatalism about where the Queen's realms are headed. Facing Republican challenges to his visit, His Royal Highness could offer no more than a limp-wristed passivity. Quote, "We support with pride and respect your decisions about your future." He did not become the Queen's second in line in order to preside over the liquidation of Her Majesty's realms, but if that's how it shakes out, hey cool, respect man. And underneath all this is Chinese money, unlimited amounts, nearly 3 billion. Papered about Jamaica, a mere $500 million in the Bahamas, and along with the cash, you get a superpower patron that doesn't have any historical baggage in the regions. Let me know your thoughts on how Platinum Jubilee year is shaping up. GBviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at GBnews. We'll talk about the Chinese machinations later in the show, but first, how's it going for the Queen and the Crown? Dickie Arbiter was the Queen's press secretary, so he knows whereof he speaks, and we always value his insights. Dickie, a bit of a wobbly start to the Platinum Jubilee year, would you say?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. It's quite interesting you sort of talk about the Chinese and the Caribbean. Look, the Chinese have got a pretty good chunk of Europe, so let's not get too excited about them having a chunk of the Caribbean. I think the Americans will be more worried than the Brits. Look, Jamaica became independent in 1962. They've had 60 years to decide to get rid of the monarchy. They've decided now, under the Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, who made no bones about it, even during the welcome to Prince William, he said that, to in effect, that we're going to go it alone. We're going to get rid of the Queen as our head of state. Look, the Queen's very pragmatic. In 2000, a few months after the Australian referendum, in which they rejected the government in wanting to ditch the monarchy, said it is for the people to decide. Look, in Barbados, the people didn't decide, the government decided, but the people decided to give the government a sweeping chance because they voted every delegate of the same party into Parliament. I'm not sure what they're going to do in Jamaica, whether it's going to be put to the people. The Prime Minister certainly made up his mind. It's a fact of life. It's called evolution. The Queen's pragmatic about it. William seems to be pragmatic about it. Prince Charles seems to be pragmatic about it. I don't know why everybody's getting hot under the collar, quite frankly.
Well, I take your point, Dickie, but purely by coincidence, I happen to be having a small private dinner with the Duke of Edinburgh the night before the Australian referendum. And I don't think everyone else apart from me at that dinner is dead now, so I'm not betraying any secrets, I don't think. But I was astonished by His Royal Highness's knowledge of the Australian Constitution, of Australian affairs, and of the Australian system. And although you say the Queen is pragmatic about this, I would bet there's some kind of a sense of loss if her realms are going to be picked off one by one in what's supposed to be a celebratory year for her.
Yeah, I can fully understand that, and there probably would be a sense of loss, but pragmatism rules over everything else. These countries have been independent for a long, long time, and they want to go it alone. Australia probably will go independent and have its own head of state at the end of this reign, whenever that may be. I hope it's not... It's still going to go on for a long time, but I think we've got to grow up. We've got to accept that these are independent countries. They are self-governing countries, and perhaps they would now like to have their own head of state, one of their own people, rather than somebody who is several thousand miles away. So, as I said a moment ago, we shouldn't get hot under the collar. I don't think the Queen's getting hot under the collar over it. I don't think the royal family are. It's just the commentators seem to be getting hot under the collar about it.
Well, who actually is running this side of things at the palace or wherever? Because the Queen has a viceroy in Barbados. As we saw, that viceroy, in fact, went over to the other side, as it were. There's a Commonwealth Secretary General, Baroness Scotland, in London, although protecting the Commonwealth realms doesn't seem to fall within her remit. Is there actually, and I know various of her, there's a Canadian the Queen has a Canadian secretary and so forth, but there's no one centrally, is there, looking out for the entire collection of thrones, as it were? There's no one at the palace who keeps an eye on it.
The entire collection, as you put it, Mark, quite frankly, is governed by each particular country. Each country will put up its own Governor General, put forward the name to the Queen, and the Queen will approve. She'll rubber stamp it because it's come from the Prime Minister's office. She takes the advice of ministers, whether it's her Prime Minister in the UK or whether it's the Prime Minister of Australia or wherever. But she will take the advice that is the person that the people that they have chosen, and she'll rubber stamp it, she'll endorse it. So they kind of run themselves in much the same way as they govern themselves. And it really is, it's not something that we should be getting overexcited about. Look, India went in 1947, Pakistan went in 1947, South Africa went it alone in 1960, came back into the Commonwealth once Nelson Mandela became president. It was the first thing he did before rejoining the United Nations. So we shouldn't get excited. It's called evolution. Countries going it alone, and they should be allowed to go it alone. And I don't think the Queen, yes, it is a loss. They've been part of her realms for so many years, but life moves on, and she moves on with it.
But do you not think, Dickie, that part of the Queen's particular glamour versus, say, the Queen of Denmark or the King of the Netherlands is that there is this global aspect to her reign and to her role? And do you not worry that if she were to become solely a sovereign within these islands, that's, in a certain sense, it's a diminution of the monarchy and of Britain in a certain sense too, isn't it?
I don't believe for a moment it's a diminution of the monarchy or of the United Kingdom. Look, Denmark has got possessions. Denmark has got Iceland. Holland has got islands in the Caribbean. They are independent islands, but the monarch is still their head of state. The monarchs don't go there very often, but they are self-governing. There is a governor who acts on behalf of the monarch. I don't think that it devalues the monarchy in this country. We're a big country. We're a grown-up country. We're an independent country. And therefore, the monarchy is very strong. As far as the realms are concerned, it's not so strong because they want to go it alone. And William quite understood that. He made it clear. He made it clear in his statement. The Queen made it clear in 2000. Prince of Wales made it clear in Barbados. So why are we all getting terribly excited about it?
Well, I would say I am, because I think I'm just putting this up front. If you think that constitutional monarchy is a good system, the loss of constitutional monarchies is a sad thing. And certainly the history of decolonization and the Commonwealth is that would you rather be Jamaica or would you rather be Burma, if you look back at the histories since decolonization. So I think if you believe, and I assume the Duke of Cambridge believes in constitutional monarchy, so it's slightly odd for me that he takes this, well, whatever you want is cool with me attitude to what is the entire raison d'etre of his existence.
I believe that each country believes in a constitutional head of state. It just so happens that 15 of the 53 members of the Commonwealth are currently realm states. That will reduce in the fullness of time. Barbados has gone. Maybe other Caribbean islands have gone. Will go in due course. Maybe Canada, Australia, and New Zealand will go at the end of this reign. We don't know, and I'm not going to crystal ball gaze on that one. But there's certainly rumblings within the government to get their own head of state rather than a head of state thousands of miles away. But I think we've got to be pragmatic about this, that life does move on. And we're living in an age where one country shouldn't have a head of state that governs, well, it doesn't govern, but is a ceremonial head of state over another country. I don't think we should worry about that anymore.
Do you not feel that there's something in the broader sense that there's You know, I don't want to go full Franz Josef in 1915 on you, Dickie, but that there's a sort of crepuscular feel at the moment, even in this time that ought to be of great celebration. And you've been through all the jubilees with the royal family. Even in this time of great celebration, it feels like something's coming to an end and we're not sure what's going to happen next.
I don't believe something is coming to an end, because while the Queen might lose the realms in the Caribbean and other countries, there is still the Commonwealth. She is head of the Commonwealth. It is a Commonwealth of nations. It is a club. It is a voluntary club. Nobody is forced to join. They join because they want to. I mean, look, their country, Prince of Wales is going to the next Commonwealth Heads of Government conference in Rwanda, Kigali. Rwanda was never part of the British Empire. It never had British connections, but they wanted to join, as did Mozambique, which was Portuguese, as do Angola, which was Portuguese. So there is still the Commonwealth Club, of which the sovereign is head of state. And at the end of this reign, Prince Charles will become the head of the Commonwealth, as the Queen wished it, and the Commonwealth agreed. William said he doesn't know whether he's going to be head or not. That is up to the Commonwealth to decide. There is still this big club, so we should accept that and not worry too much about the loss of a few realm states, because they want to go it alone. They feel that they're grown up enough, they've got big boy pants on, that they want to have their own head of state, their own constitutional head of state.
Well, I thank you for that big boy pants line. I think real men dig constitutional monarchy. So, big boy pants, you can be a constitutional monarchist in your big boy pants too. Thank you, as always, Dickie.
I'm all for a constitutional monarchy, but, you know, at the end of the day, these countries want to go it alone. And if that's what they want to do, then they should be allowed to do it.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Dickie, and we'll take up the Chinese aspect about this later in the show. It's always great to see you. You are by far the best when it comes to the insights into the actual goings-on at Buckingham Palace. We'll get to your reaction to this story next, and if you don't like monarchy, beware of the hereditary element in corrupt republics. We talked a fortnight or so back about all those Ukrainian biolabs getting US funding. You know who helped get them? Those bazillions of dollars? Joe Biden's son. Gee, with these republics, it's like Prince Andrews all the way down. Phelan McAleer will dissect that one all straight ahead on GB News, Britain's news channel. Don't touch that dial. We're coming right back.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Let's get to your emails. Nelson, are you the guy on top of that big pillar in Trafalgar Square? Is that Nelson? Thank you for writing. Nelson said there's nothing to loot through pillaging and killing anymore. So I think the Commonwealth is now useless. Look, the Commonwealth is very light on the pillaging front. It's easy listening pillaging. It's very low-key pillaging. Ron says China owns half of it now. That is true. And I believe that China has actually targeted the Commonwealth specifically because it's a network that if you start snaffling up various parcels of it, that leads naturally to snaffling up other parcels, as we're seeing in the Caribbean. Joe says, ever since Grenada, the Commonwealth has been little more than a way for businesses to network and a small section on a Wikipedia entry. Candy says, perhaps the Commonwealth is relevant if you're a middle-aged white man nostalgic for the days of empire, not if you're a poor black Jamaican wanting a better standard of living. Chinese investment is what's relevant to you. You're missing a big point to this, Candy. Actually, when China comes in with its Belt and Road initiative, it's debt-ridden dependency. It comes in as a loan shark. So that, for example, if you can't repay those loans, as in both Uganda and Sri Lanka, to take two Commonwealth countries, in Sri Lanka you wind up with the Chinese got a 99-year lease on the port they supposedly built for Sri Lanka, and they took the Ugandan airport, Entebbe airport, they've taken that in perpetuity. So the fact is, this is a way of conquering the world, not through looting and pillaging, as Nelson was recommending, but this is a way of taking the world by making them your debtors, your geopolitical debtors. China are no fools about this. So if that poor black Jamaican thinks his life is going to get any better by being in debt to China, he's very misinformed. Les says the new Commonwealth will be known as the CCCCP, i.e. the Commonwealth of Communist Caribbean Countries Protectorate. We are going to have to come up with a new name once it's under Chinese ownership, aren't we? Margaret, Dickie Arbiter is absolutely correct. What's all the fuss about why everyone is getting hot under the collar? Well, because if nobody got hot under the collar, what would be the point of having news channels? I mean, for goodness sake, Margaret, play along. Let's see a bit of smoke rising from your collar now and again. You're not entering into the spirit of things. Okay, every time I look at the woeful state, enough with diminishing Britain, we're going to get on to diminishing America now. And every time I look at the woeful state of the Washington, D.C. political class, I'm reminded of Lord Byron. There is the moral of all human tales, 'tis but the same rehearsal of the past. First freedom, and then glory. When that fails, wealth, vice, corruption, barbarism at last. Thus, a quarter-millennium-old republic devolves down to Joe Biden. Wealth, vice, corruption. Joe Biden has wealth beyond any plausible explanation. His son Hunter does not want for vices, chiefly crack cocaine and prostitutes. He left his crack pipe on the passenger seat of his rental car when he returned it. That's like Rental Car 101, boys and girls. You'll never get into the Platinum Points program at Hertz if you keep returning the vehicle full of crack pipes. And Hunter also has a heavy prostitution habit. He uses the girls as his confessors and then lets them film him confessing. And unlike priests, even in America, there is no hooker-client confidentiality, so it's potentially a security risk. Wealth, vice, corruption. We reported a couple of weeks back on the strange decision by the United States government to fund gain-of-function research into the deadliest pathogens at Ukrainian biolabs, such as the one in Odessa. I was trying to get to a week or so back when I was in beautiful Ukraine. Well, it gets better. It turns out that it was Hunter Biden's investment firm, Rosemont Seneca, a partnership between him, John Kerry's stepson, and a third man, Devon Archer, who's about to go to jail because his dad isn't as famous as Joe Biden or John Kerry. That's the way it works in US justice. It was Hunter's firm, as I said, that helped secure all the bazillions in funding for researching those killer pathogens in Ukraine. Now, the last time I mentioned this, the dweeby boys at The Independent and elsewhere got the vapors. They couldn't point out anything I said that was wrong. But these ambitious young reporters apparently went into journalism just to copy out the received wisdom of Twitter each day and excoriate anyone who dissents from it. Kind of pathetic way to make a living, really. But if you ever fancy getting off your butts and doing some real work, boys and girls, I'll repeat the name of Hunter's company, Rosemont Seneca Technology Partners, and it's lobbying on behalf of a firm called Metabiota. Metabiota. World War III isn't a good idea one way or the other, but if you have to get into one, the assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo is less idiotic than the protection of the Biden family's corrupt business interests. Phelim McAleer knows all about this because he's making a film on Hunter with Lawrence Fox in the leading role, and Phelim joins me now. Hunter's been nudged a little into the limelight in the last couple of weeks, with the New York Times basically admitting that now it doesn't matter. The Hunter Biden laptop was true all along. They're not seriously going to investigate him or reveal the truth about him as your film does, are they?
No, not at all. They're going to claim that they have covered the story now. It was in paragraph 23 of their article about Hunter Biden. So, and they will point to that as we have covered the story. We all know, though, how these outlets could cover stories if they want. They could cover it from every angle possible. They could interview the strippers. They could go to Ukraine. They could go to the biolab. They could go to the Chinese business partners. They could interview Devon Archer. They could interview Tony Bobulinski. They could ask them, are these emails genuine? They've done none of that. They will not do any of that because there's a lack of curiosity that only comes when they know the story is true and they don't want the answer.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. I mean, the way they smashed down, until Victoria Nuland admitted it in her congressional testimony, as a crazed QAnon conspiracy theory, that the United States is funding biolabs on Russia's doorstep. Why do you think even that isn't enough to command their attention? Because that seems the sort of thing that if, say, Donald Trump Jr. were doing it, they would be most interested in.
Sadly, I mean, and you hit the nail on the head earlier, it's a really sad way to make a living. And sometimes I almost feel like writing to these young journalists on Twitter saying, did you go into journalism for this? I mean, did you really go into journalism to not follow stories, to not follow the truth where it is without friend or favor? It's much more fun as a journalist to do that, to knock even your own side and just rake muck. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be a muckraker. But for them, it seems to be that, they're Twitter archaeologists, Twitter archaeologists to bring people down, but most incurious when it's their friends.
Yeah, and it's funny because in this case, like this current story that's around at the moment, where 3 Ukrainian negotiators were mysteriously poisoned with some kind of nerve agent while having a meeting to set up the meeting to have the talks proper. So it's a weird situation because we've actually got nerve agent stories. So you could say, oh, well, aside from this nerve agent story, what about this other one happening at these labs in Odessa and Kiev and all the rest of it?
I mean, it's disgusting, actually. It's got very real world consequences. I mean, I'm at the stage now where I don't believe anything anyone tells me about Putin and Ukraine. And that is very sad. And it's very dangerous for the Ukraine as well, because, no one really no one will believe what the mainstream media tells them. And, if ever there was a need for honest reporting and truthful reporting, this is the moment. And people are not believing them because they're refusing to cover obvious, juicy stories like funding biolabs in the Ukraine. And when you're not doing that, why would you believe anything else they ever have covered? And this is causing problems.
Yeah, one of the odd things to me is we've been talking about globalization for 30 years or something now. And one of the interesting facets of it is that the American political class seems to have globalized its corruption. So that in the old days, they just used to have to find some nickel and dime racket in Idaho or wherever to keep them going. Now there's almost weirdly close links between, Ukraine. How did Ukraine wind up being so vital to the interests of the Clinton family, the Biden family, the John Kerry family? And what does that say for any other nations out there? I mean, if you were in the jungles of New Guinea, would you find a Hunter Biden biolab receiving hundreds of millions of dollars in US government funding?
Yeah, it struck me also, there they are, they're interviewing all these obscure people with vague connections to Ukraine. Why aren't they asking Hunter Biden for an interview for his expertise on the Ukraine? He was on the board of directors of a Ukrainian oil and gas company. He was bringing investment into the country. I'm being slightly facetious here, but honestly, it's so weird that the first family has this massive connection to the Ukraine. Like Joe Biden, when he was vice president, boasted about withholding funding from the country so that a prosecutor would be fired. And he got the prosecutor fired and then released the funding. This is a family that has massive connections to this country. Shouldn't those connections be examined?
Well, what I can't get over, Phelim, is the way it's almost like so obvious here. It's like all of a sudden we're on the verge of World War III, and we've got Joe Biden to unleash chemical weapons on Russia, and we've got Russia explicitly saying that it doesn't rule out the use of nuclear weapons. So this time next week we could all be dead in a blazing fireball, and that's it, kaboom, over. And funnily enough, the country that Joe Biden has chosen to launch World War III over is one in which he and his family have weirdly extensive business interests. How can you not cover that?
Well, that's exactly it. Like, how can you pretend that such a juicy story is not a story? Look, these are people who made a connection out of Donald Trump being a Russian agent for 3 or 4 years, out of nothing, out of whole cloth, out of a dossier written by the real dodgy dossier written by a former MI5 or MI6 agent who hung around bars in Moscow writing tittle tattle, and it was funded by the political opposition. They spent millions of words on it. There was an investigation. Nothing came out of it. Why won't they spend 1/10 or 1/100th of that energy to investigate Ukraine? And the answer is because they don't want to find out what the answer is.
Right. That's a great way of putting it. Let me ask you this, since you've been filming the Hunter Biden story as a feature film with Lawrence Fox in the title role. I always find it difficult, to write about people or to say about if you don't feel some kind of sympathy for them. Are there actually, aspects of Hunter Biden's life, his terrible artwork, his insatiable appetite for prostitutes and crack? Is there anything? Did you find him in any kind of sense of sympathetic elements of the sympathetic character in there?
Actually, we did. I suppose being Irish, and you'd understand this a little bit more, being Irish, we can't really make fun of people's addictions, given that we probably exported alcoholism all over the world. And we wanted to make, you have to make these characters sympathetic in a movie, but actually there's a lot to be sympathetic towards Hunter anyway, because he is his father, he's an addict, which is sad. His father saw that and thought, what can I do with this addict? Rather than getting him to rehab, he simply used him as his bag man. He was bringing in the money for the family. This is how you do corruption nowadays. You don't give it to Joe Biden, you give it to the children or the uncle. And it was Hunter who was sent out to get the money. He accompanied Joe on Air Force 2 and went and did the deals that brought the family money. So this is a man who is being used by his family. He's a vulnerable addict. And yeah, there's a lot to be sympathetic. Now, there's a lot to be looking at him in a different light as well. But yes, this is a sad character in some ways, a sympathetic character.
Yeah, you're right. You're right there. And if his father truly cared about him, he wouldn't say, "Hey, the best way to deal with your crack problem is to go and make dodgy deals with the Chinese, with you as the middleman, getting all that Chinese and Ukrainian money to me." Thank you very much, Phelim. I'm looking forward to that film. And do promise me that on Oscar night you'll slug Chris Rock if you get the Best Picture award, because I think they should make that a regular tradition. Thank you very much, Phelim. Coming up, you can ask me anything you'd like. Stump the Steyn, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Don't touch that dial. We're swinging right back with more on whether the Chinese are doing what the Russians and the Germans never managed and snaffling up the British Empire wholesale. Stick around.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, despite having our civil liberties snatched away in the pandemic, does the West still take freedom for granted? Social media activist and singer Flint Bedrock's motto is "Freedom is never given, it's won." He'll be joining me live. Plus, GB News star Neil Oliver and positive Professor Carol Sikora tackle the headlines with their trademark passion and reason, and I'll break down the day's biggest stories with my superstar panel. The Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, senior reporter at the iNewspaper Benjamin Butterworth, and the social commentator Esther Kraku. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
On this day in 1854, Britain, as did France, declared war on Russia. in a conflict that eventually focused on the Crimean Peninsula. That's in what is now very nominally Ukraine. No one has officially declared war on Russia, but Joe Biden on his trip to Europe kept wandering off prompter and, as we were talking about earlier, ad-libbing threats of chemical attacks and regime change on the Kremlin. So you never know. I don't know whether that's the way to wage war in the third millennium, to be honest. China, by contrast, hasn't fired a shot but has managed to become the world's dominant power merely by letting America hand over its entire manufacturing sector. Chairman Xi uses the profits from that to buy up other nations all over the globe. And a remarkable number of those nations belong to the Commonwealth, from the Solomon Islands to Sri Lanka to Uganda to Jamaica. Conor McLaughlin is a security analyst who's worked in Sweden, Australia, and indeed for the FCO here in London. Conor, how concerned should we be about talk of a Chinese military base in the Solomon Islands? I should just remind viewers, going back to what Dickie Arbiter said, that the Queen of the Solomon Islands is a lady called Elizabeth II. So it seems very odd in one of the Queen's realms to have a Chinese military base. What do you make of that situation?
Well, thank you for having me. I think the first thing that a lot of people don't understand about the Pacific in general is that Chinese presence isn't a new phenomenon. So they've got a big presence with the Fijian police force. They offer military assistance to Papua New Guinea. But I think what's different about the Solomon case is that an established military base would put China in striking distance to a lot of Commonwealth nations, such as Australia and New Zealand. And I think that's what's most concerning to the Australian government in particular, the fact that a Chinese attack could be imminent should the military pact pass through the Solomon Islands Parliament.
Yeah, just going back to that Australian situation, did they drop the ball on this? 15 years ago, I was down under and having a relaxing scotch with Alexander Downer, who was then the foreign minister, and he was talking to me about the Solomons specifically. He was talking about a lot of places Britain decolonised in the 1980s, and China had gone in there, and therefore Canberra had been obliged to go back in and settle it with Australian judges and deputy chief constables and things. And I said to him, do you have, and with reference to the Solomon Islands in particular, and I said to him, do you have a name for that policy? And he said sheepishly, well, how about neo-imperialism? So they were thinking about it then, and it looks now as if the real neo-imperialists have in fact been the Chinese.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Australian government in many ways has taken the Pacific for granted. So the Pacific Step Up, which was kind of a joint Labour and Liberal commitment within Australia, was kind of the overarching dynamic of how Australia wished to engage with the Pacific. But throughout all of the rhetoric, there wasn't a lot of policy action. And then what that has done is created a vacuum for the Chinese to re-step in because of their kind of historical ties to the region. And then obviously China has taken that one step further to engage within a kind of a military security pact that undermines Australia and New Zealand's national interests.
Is it too late to do anything about it? I mean, there was this chap in one of the Australian papers who was basically calling for the Australian Armed Forces to invade the Solomons. Is it actually, unless you're willing to do that, and Scott Morrison doesn't seem to be the kind of fellow who does stuff like that, is it too late? Has the ship sailed?
No, I don't think so. Although a lot of people within Australia's foreign policy circles are calling this Australia's Cuban Missile Crisis, I don't think it's too late because at first the security pact between China and the Solomon Islands is only a draft at the moment. But I think there is a lot of appetite from both the Solomon Islands government and the people of the Solomon Islands for renewed Australian engagement. So what I think the Australian government should do is double down on the already existing Security Pact, which was established in 2017. And then beyond that, look towards, say, financial commitments, foreign aid, and then driving the COVID-19 vaccine drive within the Solomon Islands.
Yeah, it's interesting if you were looking at it from the point of view of the Solomons, or indeed, as we were talking about earlier, from the point of view of the Jamaicans or the Barbadians. The Chinese are offering such huge amounts of money that it's not really is it anything that, say, Canberra or London can compete with in that way?
In terms of financial contribution, I don't think so. Because, from the perspective of the Solomon Islands, their foreign policy status is friends with everyone and enemies with no one. So in that regard, I think the Chinese does have a financial advantage. Plus, on top of that, the Australian government has continuously cut the foreign aid budget, which doesn't assist in the Pacific step-up or the engagement with the Pacific. But I think there are things that Australia can offer that the Chinese government can't. The first one is just the natural engagement that Australia has in the region. There's other things like labour mobility and student mobility that a lot of the Pacific Island states do like about Australia, as well as their access to Australian kind of domestic education systems, and some cases in which they can access the welfare system, similar to the New Zealand situation. So I do think there are situations where Australia can offer more to the Pacific beyond the security and kind of the financial dynamic that we can't compete with China.
Well, if you look at the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge in the Caribbean, by comparison, what seems to have happened there is that the George Floyd frenzy from 2 years ago went around the world and imposed, in a certain sense, the American racial paradigm on places that had completely different racial histories. So if you look at Barbados and Jamaica, when the royal family show up now, they're supposed to be apologizing for enslaving people and all the rest of it. Generally speaking, the Pacific, the Commonwealth Pacific, doesn't have that kind of history. So is there something else that is driving some of these Pacific governments to turn away from old ties and towards a new benefactor? I mean, in other words, besides the money, what's Chairman Xi got that the Queen or Prince William or whoever hasn't?
I think that the primary consideration in relation to Australia, there is a historical tie to that. The fact that, say, Papua New Guinea was colonised by Australia in the post-war period, as well as the fact that Fiji and I believe Vanuatu were able to join the Commonwealth just before Federation. But then that was excluded because of the White Australia policy. But essentially what kind of the Chinese Communist Party can offer the Pacific Islands beyond Australia is, the general dynamic of, illiberal values. So if there are kind of illiberal systems that are taking place within the Pacific Islands, Australia, which upholds, values of democracy, the liberal international order, those, overarching dynamics that China doesn't really consider, embedded into their discourse. And I think that's where a lot of the Pacific Islands perhaps might turn to China beyond Australia, because China can look the other way.
Right, that's a very interesting point, and probably something worth having a conversation on entirely separately, particularly in these days of coercive COVID regimes, although that too comes back to China. Thank you very much, Connor. We appreciate that. Let us close things out by trying to stump the Steyn a little bit. Daniel has quite a good point. He says, Mark, I'm curious as to why you think it's natural for countries to have buffer states, or more generally spheres of influence in which it's appropriate for them to use military force to ensure compliance. I can see there was a reality in the 19th century when 10 miles was about the range of action of a large military formation. But precision long-range weapons, coupled with the need for massive supply lines that can be interdicted by such weapons, have lessened the advantages of simple numerical superiority. Both Cuba and Venezuela are within America's sphere of influence, but we let them suffer in their own totalitarian hell with little concern about their proximity. As things stand, arguing that big countries are allowed buffer states is little more than saying the big guys are allowed to conquer the little guys. No, actually, I would say that's quite the opposite, Daniel. I think you've slightly misunderstood me on buffer states, which are actually different from spheres of influence. The example I always give is Afghanistan, where Britain in the 19th century it fought, it fought 3 Afghan wars, and with the exception of the first, they went pretty well. But they didn't want to incorporate Afghanistan into the empire for the very good reason that they didn't want a British-Russian land border, because that means that when something goes wrong at that land border, it's a great power conflict. If there's a so-called buffer state there, then it's a buffer conflict, which is generally of a lower order. And that's what we've seen in Ukraine. Ukraine realistically should not be forming a land border between the West and the Russian Empire. And that's why right now there are hospitals being blown up and kindergartens being blown up. That's simply a reality of life. If, for example, Mexico was part of Tsar Putin's empire, that fiasco at the southern border of the United States would be a superpower conflict. It's sometimes useful. It's sometimes useful to have buffer states so you don't get into the Third World War. Joe says, will somebody please sack Priti Patel? Well, I'll volunteer to sack her, Joe, but I don't think she has to pay any attention to me. There's only one man who can sack Priti Patel. He doesn't seem inclined to do it, although they might fall out for something you never saw coming, some personal difference that you never saw coming. Mark says, who will be the next person to be poisoned by throwing the rattle out of the pram, losing the war, Putin? Well, actually, I was just thinking that. There's a bit of a funny smell here in the studio today, and I was thinking, I've known that smell before. What is it? Is it polonium or is it Novichok? I don't know what it is, but there's something in the air. Brian says, hi, Mark. Did you know that Will Smith was a big slapper? I can't really get interested. I can't really get interested in this. I suggested to Phelan that I certainly hope when he wins Best Picture that he punches the lights out of Chris Rock or whoever is the Oscar host that year. So but I can't. But I'm inclined to think that was a staged event, because the Oscars is totally unwatchable now, and it's gotten completely worse. Now, it used to be, first it was the Best Original Song category that went down the toilet. Then it was that the show itself, they lost the ability to do an awards show. It's a lost art. We've lost a lot of arts. We've lost opera. Nobody can do opera. Nobody can write a symphony. Nobody can do an awards show. That's how finished our culture is. Okay, on that cheery note, that you know who can do a show? He does the best show. I love watching it. I love the format. I love the host. Dan Wootton is here to make your Monday for 2 Marvy hours. Don't miss it. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGiven. Some parts of the UK have enjoyed 10 days of sunshine, but there'll be a lot more cloud over the next 24 hours and beyond. Showers in places as well, and feeling cooler on Tuesday before it turns colder Wednesday onwards. Arctic air is on the way. It's behind a cold front which is pushing into the north of Scotland during Monday night. Another front is moving up from the south to bring rain to southern counties of England overnight, and a few showers remain across northern England, southern Scotland as well. A lot of low cloud creeps in from the North Sea to affect parts of eastern and central England. So it's a cloudy start to Tuesday, but a mild start, 5 to 9 Celsius compared to what's to come. And then, as we go through Tuesday morning, showers continue to affect the south coast, and further outbreaks of rain will affect the north coast of Scotland. And this is a cold front that's coming south. It's going to bring some sleet and snow over the hills, but more significantly, a marked temperature drop for the Northern Isles with some sleet and snow showers here, compared with the mild air that hangs on elsewhere. Although with cloudier skies, it's certainly going to be cooler, 11 to 13 Celsius for England, Wales